Boy, automation has come a long way. We've got tools like Make and Zapier that are incredible for connecting your tech stack. But when you wire up every single tool directly to every other tool, so a point-to-point connection, you're creating a digital spaghetti mess. So today on Data Fuel, we're going to break down why using a centralized data warehouse as your automation hub is not really just a smarter way to do it, it should be the only way to do it. So we're going to dive into the pain points of point-to-point automation. We're going to explain how Warehouse can help fix and solve some of those problems, and then give you a game plan for making the switch. Plus, we're going to give you some examples on some real-world cases. So the mess of point-to-point automation. So most SMBs start by connecting tools directly, utilizing a tool like Zap or Make, creating point-to-point connections like HubSpot to QuickBooks or Airtable to Google Sheets. There's a lot of ways that you can connect point-to-point systems, and honestly, Zaps have created a really easy way to do this with pre-built automations. That said, what happens when you're building in a point-to-point environment is that you start to see issues with integration sprawl. So you're integrated across all of these different systems one-to-one, and then there's a little bit of fragility when one app changes. You could have some degree of conflicting or stale data if there isn't one place that's actually normalizing that data. And you may also have increased latency of how these processes are all moving together. So one workflow that you create can break when a single field name changes in HubSpot. That can lead to a cascade of Zap failures. We've all been there where you've got a Zap that breaks. It's been working, then it breaks. Why did it break? Well, there's some sort of issue, a field, something that's causing the Zap to fail, largely predicated upon what type of data is coming into the system. So enter in the centralized warehouse, the single source of truth for all of your data. We really want to create what we would call a hub and spoke model. So instead of a spider web where everything's really sprawled out across all of your systems, you've got a single hub in the centralized warehouse and then spokes out to your other systems. So the benefits that we're talking about here is that you've got clean, trustworthy data that's all sitting inside of the centralized warehouse. So it's all structured once and then used everywhere. So you have a little bit less reliance on APIs from source tools, meaning you have the ability to not only centralize everything, but on the way in, when data is coming into your centralized warehouse, you create structure within that. You create the cleansing of that data that is then used elsewhere. So let's think about it this way. Instead of having 10 direct lines between 5 apps, you now have 5 clean lines into the warehouse, and every automation reads from one place. So I like that a lot better, where you've got 5 apps and you've got 10 different lines going back and forth, and now you've got one clean feed from the data warehouse to the apps. So how do we start to think about architecting something like this? First, we need to choose our data warehouse. BigQuery, Snowflake, Postgres, a lot of options out there. Then we need to set up our syncs from the source tools. So you could use a tool like Stitch, Fivetran, Airbyte, or manual API pulls. If you go the manual API pull route, there will be some increased maintenance, but you get to control it. I kind of like that option. Once we have these API pulls and syncs set up from the source tools, we need to clean and model the data. Meaning, we need to have one centralized place where, let's use an example of client IDs. You've got a client ID, a unique identifier in HubSpot, a unique identifier in your billing software, a unique identifier in maybe your workflow management tool. All 3 of those are independent but relate to the same record. So you need a model that actually stitches those together. If you have that model that's stitching everything together, you now make it much easier to be able to pull data from that warehouse and push it to the apps. So we want to utilize tools like Make and Zapier to pull from the warehouse and push to apps, not the other way around. We don't want to be pulling from apps and then pushing into the data warehouse. We always want to be pushed to apps or pulled from the warehouse. So instead of having 3 Zaps from HubSpot to different tools, we create one warehouse table, and we use filtered scenarios to push updates to Slack, to QuickBooks, to Google Sheets, whatever the end point is. So some common use cases that can actually scale better in this scenario, let's think about invoicing. We want to pull information from a single client project from a single ready-to-bill view. So If your invoicing process right now is predicated upon somebody sending a Slack message to somebody, then making an update in a system, and then it zaps information to another system, if all of that information is being pulled from your source tool into a warehouse, you can create an automation that says, hey, once this step happens, then we want to actually pull from this table, maybe it's a ready to bill table, into your billing software. We start to create some efficiencies there. Let's go through another example of maybe weekly reporting. So you've got a specific report that you like to run every single week, and you've got a make automation that's actually pulling that report for you. Now, what happens though is that once those fields are all mapped out, let's say you make some changes to chart of accounts or to the way in which the report actually outputs the data. So if that data is actually being pushed into a data warehouse and it's in a consistent manner, the same every single week, you can now actually pull that same structured data, even if something's changed on the front end, because you've got a table normalizing the input. You now have the far greater ability to send a summary to Slack, to email, wherever, without that process breaking. The warehouse logic can include derived fields, it can include data joins, it can include error handling, even well before the automation even runs. So you don't get to the point where the automation runs, it stops halfway and says, hey, we got an issue here because these data fields weren't joined because some new input was included on the call. Now, what's the 80-20 rule? I always like to think about things through the lens of the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule when getting started with anything. We don't need to start by building this perfect warehouse. We really just need enough structure to start reducing some of the chaos and minimize the amount of errors that happen in your automation. So if we could start with 1 to 2 high friction automations, so you know what those Zaps are. Every other week you're getting pinged, hey, there's an issue here. If we can start to build a single table that supports multiple downstream actions, we can then use the warehouse to log and monitor the automation over time. Meaning, we're shifting this mindset from this point-to-point automation that has a lot of friction in it because things keep changing, and we're drilling it down into the warehouse that is normalizing everything. And it's actually giving you feedback on, hey, this thing changed, we need to make a slight update here, and or you train the model in order to make the changes on its own. So this is a mindset shift because we're actually building an operating system for our business and not just a tangle of one-off scripts that can help automate what you're doing. I think building one-off scripts, building one-off automations are fantastic, and we should be moving that direction. But if you're aiming towards scalability, if you're aiming towards growth in your business, a great way to do that is building scripts off of a centralized data warehouse. That's going to be an effort that may be pretty high up front, but if you can start small, start with the 1 to 2 high friction automations and build a single table, a single normalized model that helps you take your data, cleanse it, and then put it in a place where it's going to be consistent. No matter what the input source is, you're going to be far better off when you're building automations based off of that. So when we're using a data warehouse with Zapier and Make, it's not just cleaner, it's supposed to be smarter. You get better data integrity, a little bit easier debugging, and way less maintenance at the end of the day. So if you can pick a single automation in your business, route the data through a warehouse instead of straight from the source, and start to see how much easier it is to actually create automations based on that framework. I hope that's a helpful idea on how to get started in building more efficient automations to help you become a more profitable and sustainable business in 2025.
Thanks for tuning in to Data Fuel. We hope today's insights help fuel your SMB's growth. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review the podcast so we can keep bringing you more data-driven strategies. Till next time, keep fueling your business with data.